you serve my love. You serve my love.
Yeah, something tells me we're not talking about the same Lord here. I've been noticing a lot of mushrooms, moss, and fungi growing up around my place from the lack of sunlight, mainly because of chemtrailing. I'm sure a lot of you have too. The mushrooms didn't used to be in my yard at all, let alone taking it over, or growing around the darker parts of my sheds. This is just a sample, and they were literally starting to grow everywhere, along with just about every feasible variety of weed taking over. There were several larger ones I didn't record before I destroyed them. I didn't figure on making a video about it. These broken concrete walkways were actually meant to have moss growing in between, which required actually planting it there, but had long since died, until this year. Now they're coming back with a vengeance, and I'm pretty sure this isn't the species of moss that was originally planted, because it's coming up everywhere else along with the shrooms. It's also starting to grow on my edging blocks, and about anywhere it feels like growing, because they've all but shut the sun out completely with chemtrails, even if it is normal for it to rain a lot this time of year. And since the chemtrailing here seems pretty tame compared with other places, at least for now, I'm sure some of you have photos and videos of fibers and all kinds of strange substances that make these look like a blessing. My point though is moss, fungus, and mushrooms thrive in the dark. It's like we're living in a cave more and more days out of the year the more they spray us. I started thinking they're making life above ground more hospitable for what lies beneath. Yeah, have a nice day. In quite a few fantasy books, movies, and games, most of which are based on Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, cave dwellers like orcs and trolls emerge from the underworld when a dark pall or storm is cast over the earth by some wizard or demonic anti-god. Monsters can't thrive in the light. Sometimes it even kills them, or in the case of trolls, turns them into stone. The undead, such as wraiths and barrow wights, roam freely in the perpetual darkness. In Lord of the Rings, the all-seeing eye of Mordor is Sauron, the Dark Lord, the Satan of Middle-earth, directing his sorcerer minions as well as the monstrosities and hybrids. He sends out a storm from his fortress to cover their lands so the evil minions can wage war. It's also worth noting that Tolkien's name for Satan, Sauron, implies a reptilian, a serpent or dragon, as Satan is known as biblically as well as in other cultures. Apep or Apophis, Tiamat or Lotan, also known as Leviathan, to name a few. They're all the same serpent and dragon of chaos. Lord of the Rings is steeped in the occult and witchcraft, innocent a hero story as it may seem, and I left a few links so I don't have to get into all that. My point is the perpetual cloud cover is a lot like the storm of Mordor in Lord of the Rings. For quite a long time I've felt that black pall has been enveloping the world, though more a metaphor for the human condition and not really literal, even well before I really woke up and learned how much the occult elite had always influenced and even controlled everyone. But now the dark skies are becoming literal as the summers get shorter, and it's clearly a byproduct of chemtrailing and geoengineering. And no, I don't expect to see an army of orcs storming the White House anytime soon. They're already inside anyway, running the country. It may not be the reason behind chemtrailing, but the metaphor of an unholy spirit pervading the earth is just as apt. On the other hand, there are plenty of stories of things living below the earth that might be more apt to emerge if there was less sunlight. While we're having our attention focused on AI, killer drones, and nanofibers, there could be a greater threat that thrives as it emerges from the underworld. It isn't all Satanists dredging demonic spirits up from the abyss, or a parallel shadow dimension being merged with our own by CERN and quantum computers, though I am of the opinion they do just that. The standards of what would be considered hell are definitely pervading society. I already showed some amount of that. And while we could attribute a large portion of that to Tavistock social engineering, military mind control, and MK Ultra using directed energy weapons, which is being done for more reasons than I care to get into, there is an obvious unholy spirit overshadowing the world. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir about that for the most part, and most of us have had some kind of spiritual experience, unexplainable even by electronic mind control and hallucinations. But for the one or two people who come across this and don't believe in hell, there isn't a single culture or religion on Earth that doesn't have a story about the underworld. Not every culture has a worldwide flood story, but definitely their own version of hell, the abyss or hollow earth, the Stygian depths.
Stygian depths. I like that. You mention Dante to most people these days, and they ask you how you liked gremlins.
The legends may vary, and the Lord of the Underworld goes by many names, but they all share a relative truth. Summoning a demon means drawing symbols on the ground for the very reason of opening a gateway to the abyss beneath the earth. The rituals emphasize the direction of invocation, or invitation, while magic circles, pentagrams, and probably more as large or larger than CERN have been created across the earth. One example is the inverted pentagram, easily seen on a map of Washington, D.C., often claimed to be the goat of Mendes or Baphomet, just as often claimed to be a coincidence. But there's also a pentagram blatantly found in western Kazakhstan. I mentioned it in my cannibalism video I ended up making prior to this one. There are Notre Dame cathedrals in cities laid out in France to mirror the constellation Virgo, and no doubt many other places on Earth aligned to geomagnetic ley lines and constellations besides Stonehenge, the Giza pyramids, and others. Clearly the occult elite who've always existed in the shadows of civilization intended for spiritual energy, of one form or another, to sync with the physical terrestrial existence. Not all of them worship Satan, but clearly a large portion do, and given all the redemption through sin I keep presenting in videos, as many others also do, they intend for his kingdom to reign over the earth.
Satan.
Sauron, the Dark Lord, the right-hand path of Freemasonry, the Black Witches. Summoning demonic entities began long before the biblical King Solomon and the demons his wife or wives taught him to evoke to help with building his famous temple. Solomon's rituals, now termed as Goetia, have been perfected or adjusted by occultists such as Aleister Crowley and his thousands of devotees, including the OTO. While Crowley claimed to have summoned a demon, 𝗏𝗵𝗿𝗍, who appears very much like the so-called gray aliens. With all the reports of alien abductions and UFO sightings since the 1950s onward, it stands to reason they're a large part of that darkness enveloping the Earth. Perhaps the Greys are at least a part of what is coming from below, the abyss or underworld, as the abyss has been related to the oceans throughout history, where Leviathan dwells, and UFOs are often seen coming out of the ocean, even claimed to be seen firsthand by notable truthers such as William Cooper. There is a good chance they might even be the locusts coming from the bottomless pit in Revelation, or at least the minions thereof. Many who have reported near-death experiences, as well as New Agers and alien buffs, have mentioned a hierarchy of alien-like beings, including insectoids and reptilians. I would assume the insectoids are the locusts of Revelation, while the gray aliens are often claimed to be their cyborg biobot minions. It may only be a matter of time before the insectoids make themselves known openly, as many have expected with a false flag alien disclosure by the government establishment. A part of that disclosure will no doubt include so-called revelations about holes to the hollow earth through Antarctica, with stories of the fabled city of Agartha, discovered by Nazis who went there with their UFO technology and joined with the city's inhabitants, whatever those might be. There is a lot of controversy surrounding Antarctica, Admiral Byrd's mission there, and Operations High Jump and Fishbowl. While those operations have been used as proof of a flat Earth conspiracy, I just wanted to point out that a high jump might include descending into the underworld or hollow Earth from ground level, and if the Earth was considered secretly hollow, then might be reflective of a metaphorical fishbowl. Just food for thought. Regardless of what shape the Earth is, clearly the Earth has been considered to have an interior throughout history. Usually it was thought that that's where the souls of the dead are sent, which may be true at least to some extent, at least with unsaved people who deserve hell. And no doubt Antarctica and the holes at the poles will figure into it somehow. There have been so many good videos on that subject alone that I won't go into details here. It is worth noting an old newspaper article from 1934 reporting on an expedition to find a city of lizard people under Los Angeles, California, led by engineer G. Warren Shufelt. Although the city of Los Angeles had given Shufelt permission to proceed with the dig, allegedly, shortly after the story ran, the project was shut down and the tunnels were sealed shut. The story has otherwise been considered a hoax ever since. In the 1970s Saturday morning TV show Land of the Lost, with the more recent movie based on the same, Sleestaks were a race of lizard people living in underground temples in a hollow earth land of dinosaurs. There were dimensional gateways or portals created through pylons leading back to the land above, which is what Michael Aquino's Temple of Set, an offshoot of the Church of Satan, calls their individual covens or cells, pylons. Coincidence? The pylons in Land of the Lost emphasize the consistency of the occult symbolism and its relationship to hell or the hollow earth. Much like demons are said to be gated into our reality through portals in rituals. The pylons also have a subtle square and compass Freemasonic symbolism as shown with this map. More interestingly, though, the pylons are able to control the weather and atmosphere in the hollow world, even a sun simulator. There's also an intellectual Sleestak reptilian named Enoch, no doubt a reference to the biblical Enoch. Personally, I think there was a fair amount of predictive programming in the show that only seemed like fun sci-fi for kids at the time. In my own opinion, if reptilians or insectoids do exist wherever they're from, then they are a creation themselves or even hybrids of the so-called fallen angels. Some ancient stories reflect the idea that humans were created by a benevolent god and then disliked by a brother or anti-god figure like Satan, much like the well-known stories of Enki and Enlil from Sumeria. It's assumed, or believed, that either the writers of the Judeo-Christian Bible obtained their knowledge of creation from the Sumerians or had similar revelations imparted to them by angels of God. Mainly because there are distinct parallels of the first man being created, a Garden of Eden, and even a deluge legend. It's been claimed that Zoroastrianism, origin of the Persian Magi and all mystery schools that would follow, is possibly the source for the more modern version, with Ahura Mazda at odds with the embodiment of evil Ahriman. Whatever the case, theirs is not the only version with a good versus evil deity. The 𝗗𝗄𝗯 band of Indians in Southern California have a similar creation legend. Two brothers, 𝗵𝗿𝗍𝗶 and 𝗵𝗏𝗍, who themselves were products of an almighty spirit, created the earth, people, and animals. After quarreling, 𝗵𝗏𝗍 took his creations to the underworld, and 𝗵𝗏𝗍's creations remained on earth. 𝗵𝗏𝗍 taught his people the laws for survival, basically commandments. The details are not quite in line with other worldwide versions, but it's interesting that their concept of creation is still intrinsically similar to the Sumerian, Zoroastrian, and even Judeo-Christian, among other religions. There is a good God versus evil devil motif, as opposed to just good and evil spirits, and there's a creator. They all interchangeably validate one another to a degree. My point with that was that 𝗵𝗏𝗍 or 𝗵𝗏𝗰, arguably the same as the Sumerian Enlil or even Satan, took his creations to the underworld. If there's any truth to these legends, and there's always at least a grain of truth to every legend, then what exactly did Enlil 𝗵𝗏𝗍 create? Reptilians? Insectoids? The legend says people were created with no mention of anything hybrid, but there is another Native American tribe with an interesting history to support the contention of insectoid people, or that humans were taken to the underworld at least. The Hopi. The Hopi tribe has several prophecies leading up to the end of days, while most of them have already been proven true, from white people overtaking the lands, to cattle, to wagon wheels, to highways. Another of their more famous legends has to do with the ant people, who saved the ancient Hopi from a world cataclysm. The ant people took them to safety in the underworld, as is implied of 𝗕𝗏𝗿𝗄𝗏 in the 𝗗𝗏𝗃 legend. There have been many fringe theorists, including the TV show Ancient Aliens, trying to draw parallels between Hopi words for anthill, Sanskrit root words, and even ancient Egypt, and the pharaoh Akhenaten, in relation to the Anunnaki and even the Sumerian god Anu. While there is an Anasazi tribe of Pueblo Indians, there is no direct proof for the parallels, just wishful thinking mostly. The Hopi did depict their ant people, as you can clearly see, and while ancient people did paint some strange things we can only speculate about, there is an ubiquitous spiral symbol, generally accompanying gods and shamans, which quite a lot of us would interpret as some kind of portal or interdimensional or quantum gateway. Most alien theorists interpret the ant people as being gray aliens, and for all we can prove, they are correct, but the Hopi drawings don't really lend themselves as much to gray aliens as the insectoids, talked about by New Agers or those who have had near-death experiences involving them. There is no mention of reptilians, but the consistent mention of the underworld by cultures worldwide does bolster the idea that there might be actual beings living under our feet, demonic or other. Numerous places have been named the Gates of Hell, too many to list, but recently in Turkey, 2 statue guardians of the Gates of Hell were discovered at a place called Pluto's Gate at Hierapolis. Pluto's Gate is plutonium in Latin. Coincidence? One statue is of the 3-headed Greek guard dog of hell, Cerberus, while the other is a snake coiling on itself, a spiral. The spiral is considered clearly symbolic of the underworld. On a side note, the 3 heads of Cerberus may well represent the 3 stars of Orion's belt, as so many other monuments and symbols around the world, from the Giza pyramids to the Barberini bees, often seen around Catholic symbology, represent. So it's hard to tell if hell is up or down, or if all the ancient cultures who claimed angels fell from the stars, or had possibly been imprisoned below the earth, were correct. There are too many parallels to deny anyway. The name Hell itself is derived from the Nordic goddess of the underworld. Just to note the fact that the ruler of the underworld is just as often a goddess as a god being, or the equivalent of an angel of God. The Sumerian Ereshkigal is another example, and this particular relief of the Queen of the Night that I and others often show is thought to be her, if not Ishtar or Lilith. They're basically all the same anyway. I'm probably starting to bore some of my regular subs with this, but the owl symbolism of the goddess lends itself to the Bohemian Grove the elites visit for midsummer and the rituals they perform. Shills like Alex Jones claim it's Molech they worship, but it's the Queen of the Night. The eggs are a clear fertility symbol of spring and Easter, or Ostara, as opposed to the midsummer theme of the goddess, but the symbolism of the elites being owls to us Disney lab rats, who they prey and feed upon, is very clear. See my cannibalism video, among others. With many ancient depictions of the earth, heaven and hell tend to be very similar for people who had no idea what the shape of their world really was, let alone what might be underneath. The Hebrew Sheol is only one version of hell among many, but the biblical idea of 3 heavens is shared with cultures such as ancient Sumeria. This is a direct quote about the god Anu, as in Anunnaki. In Sumerian, the designation An was used interchangeably with the heavens, so that in some cases it is doubtful whether, under the term, the god An or the heavens is being denoted. In Sumerian cosmogony, heaven was envisioned as a series of 3 domes covering the flat earth. Each of these domes of heaven was believed to be made of a different precious stone. An was believed to be the highest and outermost of these domes, which was thought to be made of reddish stone. Outside of this dome was the primordial body of water known as Namu. Note the mention of the reddish stone. This is the color often argued as the color of Jesus or Yahweh by biblical scripture analysts, notably in Revelation 4:3, the color of bronze, and in some translations jasper or carnelian, reddish. I just thought that was interesting. As far as the three heavens, it's only mentioned specifically once by Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:2. While Paul was a former Gnostic who ended up preaching his own version of true Nazarene doctrine. Paul actually contradicts himself a bit in some so-called scripture, while his Gnostic background tended to creep into his beliefs, and personally I feel shouldn't even be in the Bible. In many belief systems, there are 7 heavens and even 7 hells reflective of the 7 spheres, planets as gods affecting the lives of men, in Gnostic and occult ideologies that largely stem from Babylon and the Chaldean Magi. The point here is that there is a lot of interchangeable influence between religions, which even the Hebrews and New Testament writers were borrowing from, and still doesn't even begin to address several questions and issues. Just as an example, the book of Revelation has often been labeled Gnostic by some scholars because, just for starters, the story of the woman in the wilderness is a direct retelling of the story of Apollo versus Python, but I still believe there's an inherent truth to it, whatever metaphors are being thrown around. The Bible and other religions make clear symbolism of the serpent or dragon that could be construed as the reptilians. It seems to be falling by the wayside in the truth movement, at least as far as TV glitches and seeing people shapeshift. And then we have predictive programming media to reinforce the belief in it, like the TV series V. They picked the name V because it's symbolic on at least a few levels, like being the Hebrew 6, devil horns, of the horned god, among others. While V is also the shape of the letter Shin, as in Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God.
This is the shape of the letter Shin, Hebrew alphabet Shin. Very interesting letter in the language. It's the first letter in the word Shaddai, the first letter in the word Shalom, first letter in the word Shekinah.
There's always an alien hive mother with clutches of eggs, which is also symbolized by the Illuminati queen bee, a hive mother. Certain Kabbalist beliefs have the seat or throne of Isis in the abyss, while she's also any given queen of heaven or hell that I've mentioned in passing. Whether she's a bug or a reptile is speculative, but she's not of this world in any case. Another bit of possible predictive programming of reptilians was in an old Outer Limits episode called The Deprogrammers. Yet another race of spacefaring lizards conquers the Earth and enslaves humanity. Humans are referred to as 𝗲𝗲𝗰, which I found very interesting. Not only did that strike me as a variation of Goyim, the human cattle Jews often refer to Gentiles as, but also reminds me of Golem, a spirit-filled animated body. And it makes you wonder why those two words are so similar, Goyim, Golem. And on top of all that, they brainwashed humans with TV to make them perfect servants unwilling to rebel.
You are 𝗲𝗲𝗰. You serve 𝗲𝗲. You are 𝗲𝗲𝗰. You serve 𝗲𝗲.
There just happens to be an Illuminati card game card with that same name too, referencing the fact of celebrity MK Ultra programming and likely the populace's indoctrination through television programming. The Outer Limits theme itself implies the idea that we're all being programmed by the black box.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear.
And all this time, some of you may have been wondering about all the deep underground military bases, DUMBs, that have been constructed, or how there has been a lot of chatter over the years about the government and military working with so-called aliens underground, and where they get some amount of their technology, or even the Nephilim offspring of the biblical fallen angels living in the hollow earth. All of that is speculative, even if it's apt to be true. It does stand to reason that the militaries of the world would have had to stumble onto something while drilling bunkers miles below the earth. But there is no reliable source material to prove it, so I'm not going into details about it. There have been so-called whistleblowers who talked about firefights with lizard people who had advanced technology, or how the military has been fighting and capturing giants in the Middle East. But it's just someone's word. It might as well be in the tabloids. Right, Bat Boy?
That's strange.
Then there are all the bunkers and shelters people have been building to survive the coming apocalypse, or even the many underground cities beneath cities like New York, Seattle, and others. Generally, there is a population of homeless or gangs living below the city, probably surviving on rats and whatever they can steal from the world above. There are also immense cave systems around the world, or even deep mining operations that are visited regularly by people. And there's never a peep about running into an armed gang of lizard folk. So it makes the hollow earth theories and the lost city of Agartha or hell seem pretty ridiculous to most. But just as we've still not explored the better part of our oceans, there's still a lot of ground to cover below the earth. So the questions still remain unanswered, and wild speculations are still up for debate. I know I took some wild twists and turns away from my original point, but is chemtrailing and geoengineering actually making our planet more hospitable for some other form of life? Will the locusts from the bottomless pit in Revelation turn out to be insectoids, like the Hopi described being saved by, only a less amiable variety? Are there secret reptilian shapeshifters among us, or some other alien life forms making the environment more suitable for themselves? In any case, it's clear to anyone awake that the public is being marked for death at an increasing pace every single day. And we need our faith in the spirit to fight against it. Believe it or don't.
You are 𝗗𝗲𝗰𝗿𝗶𝗿. You serve my lord.